Hello and welcome to another episode of The Tripod, where generally we break down every NRL game every week from a betting perspective. We're going to do something a little bit differently today. On today's pod, we are going to have a draft between me and Jacob, picking in alternate order who we think are the NRL teams that would do the best over the next 5 years. So obviously a few things to take into consideration there, age of players and contracts and all that sort of stuff. We're going to go one by one and sort of see how we go in terms of that. Jacob, are you excited?
I am excited. I think since last week where we talked about different ways to make the NRL greater, obviously we're coming up with pod ideas to keep bringing you guys a pod every week, whether it's different concepts, whether it's an interview, we want to have a good footy discussion or punting discussion. Now we're going to basically, you can think of this like predicting which of the 16 clubs is going to have the most success over the next 5 years, or another way of thinking about it, which fan base would you want to be? Which team has the brightest future? And we're going to rank them, but we're going to do it in alternating order where we're going to grab the next available, as you said, like draft format. But before we look forwards, well, we're going to look backwards at the last 5 years. And you can talk about how we're going to define, we're going to just put a definition on how you define the success of a team over a 5 year period.
Yeah, that's right. Because, you could use any sort of metric going over the 5 years. You could say who's going to make, what teams are going to make the top 8 the most, what teams are going to win the most premierships. But I think you've done a pretty good job here, Jacob, and how we're going to grade it over the next 5 years is we're going to get whichever teams we choose, you'll get 1 point if they make the top 8. You'll get an additional point if they make the top 4. An additional point to make the final, an additional point if they are premiers. So as you can see here, this is the last 5 years. Jacob, you've done a good job on the graph here, and this pretty much sums up the teams that have done the best with our scoring system over the last 5 years. And as you can see there, Storm on top, Roosters second. Not really a huge surprise there, except I guess you probably have a few things that jump out to you, Jacob. But in terms of this scoring system, I guess most people would probably think that the Roosters have far and away been the best team over the past 5 years. So was it surprising for you doing these calculations that they ended up number 2?
Yeah, a little bit, and that's just boils down to how we score it. So if you are just listening to this on the podcast, you can see this graphic and this table all laid out, summarised on Rugby League Zero Fucks Given. That's FUKS. You'll see this graphic, what we're talking about, and basically we've listed all the teams, how many times they made the 8, the 4, the grand final, and won the comp over that 5 year period. It is pretty simplistic. We didn't account for the actual ladder, so it's not wins and losses. You'll notice the Titans are 13th. Yes. They probably wouldn't be 13th by many other measures, but they've actually made the 8 in the last 5 years. A couple of clubs haven't. We didn't give any bonus for winning the minor premiership, but maybe that deserves something. I could have arguably put a -1 if you won the spoon, because there's a bit of shame involved in that. And some clubs are proud of the fact that they've never, had the wooden spoon. But overall, I think in a salary cap league, most teams go out every season, set out with a goal to make the 8. And teams that are finals teams, their goal is make the 4. If you're a top 4 team, you want to make the grand final. And of course, if you're a grand final team, you want to win it. So I think the way we've tallied the points up is pretty decent. And
I think so.
As for Storm versus Roosters, yeah, I think recency bias, definitely you think that the Roosters owned the last 5 years because they won the last 2 comps in a row. But when I looked back at this, you got to just take your hat off to the Storm. 5 years in a row, 5 years top 4 in a row, 5 prelims in a row, 3 grand finals. Yes, they only won 1 of them, whereas the Roosters won 2 out of 2. But let's not forget in the last 5 years, the Roosters had a season they finished 15th. Yep. So this point system does reward consistency as well. I'm happy with the Storm being there number 1, but clearly those 2 teams were both dynasty teams.
Yeah, I'm happy with it as well. And like you said, this system does reward consistency, and that's what we're going to try and base our picks off today. But I don't think anyone would argue that if you said, would you rather be the Roosters or the Storm over the past 5 years, then most people would certainly answer with the Roosters.
I agree. Like if you're Cam Smith, you'd rather the Roosters' recent seasons on your resume than, as I said, like 1 win at 3 grand finals. But overall, we're talking about 16 clubs, only 4 won the comp in the last 5 years. So taking how much it's worth to actually win the comp, putting that aside, I think this gives a fair indication of success. Yep. Because regular season success is still important. If you're a fan, it means your team's winning more games. It's giving you hope. It's giving you excitement. Just before we start our picks, was there anything else that jumped out at you from these, ladder positions of the last 5 years of success that surprised you?
Look, you know what jumped out at me the most, actually, is that pretty much how accurate it was. Like, there was nothing really that I looked at this table and said, that seems absolutely crazy to me. I understand that the Tigers, are obviously on 0 points and they have been very, very close recently. But, I mean, you look at this table and it is pretty much the teams that have been the most dominant throughout the last 5 years. Obviously, you've got premiership winning teams up there, that are always going to be a lot higher because of that point system. You're going to get yourself 4 points for that. But, yeah, it looks pretty much spot on, which I think is a good indication of the accuracy, or at least,
that it's a fair measure of success.
Fair measurement of this point
Look,
system.
I'll say Sharkies to come third. It does remind you how good they've been. They made the finals every year in the last 5 years. It's a testament to that squad depth that they had, where they obviously won the comp in 2016 in their one grand final appearance, but they've been consistent since then. I think they've made 1 or 2 prelims since then as well. Broncos fifth, I think, is funny because they get a lot of criticism and most people think they've underperformed the last 5 years, and maybe they have. When you consider of all the teams in the comp, they've probably come the closest to winning the grand final of anyone in the last 5 years who didn't win when it came down to that final play, the try by Felt, obviously, in the 2015 grand final. But they've still been pretty good in making a couple of prelims. They have not missed the 8 the last 5 years. I mean, there's 11 clubs that would trade the last 5 years for the success the Broncos have had for all the crap they do cop.
For sure. Yeah, absolutely. And it is a funny one. Yeah, it probably is a little bit surprising that they are fifth because, like you said, no premierships in there, only one grand final, and to still be fifth when, even in our group, people probably heap shit on the Broncos more than any other team we know. All right, Jacob, should we get stuck in, mate?
Yeah, mate. We've got to flip a coin to figure out who's going to go first.
Yes, of course.
I'm going to trust you, but I'm going to be watching.
I have my coin here, and I think it's a funny one. Yeah, maybe it's an advantage to go first. Maybe it's not, depending on.
I'll be honest. I want the number one pick. I've looked at it. I want the number one pick.
Here we go, Jacob. Call it in the air. Heads or tails?
Tails.
And no, it is not. It is
bullshit.
Heads. Can you see that?
No, I can't see that.
Right.
I don't know if you changed it. All right.
It's heads, mate, and I've got the first pick, and it is a funny one because I don't know if I would have wanted the first pick or not, because I don't know if you would have taken this team.
Now, just before you share it, mate, Do you just want to give any insight into how you went about this? We've both kind of done our own ranks, and we're going to go head to head, pick for pick. But what were the things you were looking for to decide who's going to have the most success next 5 years?
Well, first I look at the current roster construction. I look at the ages of the main players. It's fucking too hard to look at the whole roster construction and every person in there. But I like to see the main players, the spine, the key forwards, being at a younger-ish age, or at least knowing that they can give you, at least most of the next 5 years at peak performance. I want a good coach in there, obviously, because you think that's going to be a constant over the next 5 years. And also some of the contracts in terms of not only how long those main players are staying on, but also how much money they're on as well, which will, hamper some teams from recruiting decently in the future. How about you?
Yeah, I had 4 main criteria. So I went coach. That's the first thing that came to mind. And when you look back at the last 5 years, no surprise, the teams that had the best success had the best coaches. Yep. I'm sure you agree with me, Bellamy and Robinson clearly the best 2 coaches. And then I broke roster into 2 different parts. How good is the roster now?
Yep.
And then how young is the roster? And same as you, I looked at key positional players. And then my other criteria, I called it infrastructure. And I'm talking about, generally, do they have good juniors? Do they recruit well? Do they retain good players well? And then little things, do they have good facilities, a strong home advantage, strong fan base? So I'm going to use that as an X factor, because we don't know, obviously, even take a guy like Dave Fafita.
Yep.
He's coming off contract, and it's probably believed he's going to stay at Brisbane. But if he was to change, that would change how you foresee the next 5 years. So obviously there's a lot of unknown, but just based on what we know now.
It's the same as
there's no right or wrong answers, but it'll be fun to debate.
It's going on your David Fafita point. It's the same as betting. You got to kind of, and it takes too long to do it with this, but I mean you got to kind of assess it and say, look, he's probably a 70% chance, he's an 80% chance of staying. That kind of stuff.
Of course, yeah.
All right, this one might surprise you. It might not, Jacob. With my first pick in the draft, I am taking the Parramatta Eels. it's a good young team. They have a good young spine, good young halves. Dylan Brown is 19 years old. Mitch Moses is going to be there for the next 5 years. You would assume he's 25. He's still got his best years ahead of him, I think. You've got Reed Marnie, who I believe is going to be a rep level player. He's 21, and Gutho at fullback is 25. So your spine there is very young. I think they've done, like we said in the preseason podcast, I think they did some solid recruiting in the offseason. I think Regan Campbell-Gillard is a good addition. Ryan Madison, obviously a good addition as well. So I think this is a team that's only going to get better. They've got a good coach in place there as well. And one factor that I didn't talk about earlier, and you probably didn't talk about either, Jacob, is I think this year is a big one. We're going the next 5 years. So each year is worth 20% in this one for the consistency rankings. We've gotten 2 games down, and we're going to have a shortened season. So I think you got to bump the Eels a little bit for being 2-0, having a huge points differential in a season that's going to be shortened and still worth 20% of what we're counting here.
That's not a bad pick. I'll tell you now, I had them third on my board. And look, I think you're right in that you should actually wait the next year or two higher because there's less uncertainty. We know roughly who's going to be on the rosters. In 5 years from now, we don't know, what those teams exactly are going to look like. So you're better off leaning towards who you expect to be successful in more recent times. I like the Eels because I think they are a very hungry side, and all the players you named, I think the key age I put at about 28. If you've got stars who are 28 and under, I know I'm getting a good few years of performance, so I can't really fault your pick there.
I was probably a year or two under that, I guess, in terms of getting peak performance. But who do you want at number 2, Jacob?
Okay, so at number 2, I am taking the Roosters, and I thought a bit about it. Like, they won the comp in 2018 and 19, and I would say the team in 2020 is not as good as those sides. Clearly, you lost Cooper Cronk, Latrell Mitchell's not there. Even Boyd Cordner's knee, issues you hear about worry me. But it's just like the little things. They've got Trent Robinson, I said before. Players want to go there. The infrastructure, they do recruit well, even though they don't necessarily have juniors. And let me just name their key 28s and under. Tedesco, Manu, Tupou, Keary, TKO, Cordner, Crichton, Radley. And what just gets me over the edge, the next superstar they talk about, Sam Walker, the son of former NRL player Ben Walker from the Walker family. I think he's 17. He's meant to be a superstar. So even if Flanagan doesn't work out, I'm going with the Roosters. I think that's a pretty safe pick.
I have no qualms with it. I had the Roosters as my number 4 pick. Actually, obviously, you have past success there. You've got a great coach. Like you said, you've got players that want to go there and seemingly unlimited cap space. But, I said for, Keary's 28 now. That's getting along there. And Tedesco, who relies a lot on his physical abilities, 27. And, things start to wear down once you hit that 30 mark. So it's not the youngest forward pack either. And probably what tipped me over the edge I shifted them down from 3 to 4 was just the fact that they're 0-2 this year in what is, most likely, if we get any footy, going to be a shortened season.
I can deal with that, but I actually funnily think a shortened season will help them because I still think if you just look at who's got the best roster in 2020, it's still them for me. And in a shortened season, I know they can beat anyone on their day. And we were worried about fatigue, and less games actually equal less fatigue.
That's true, and maybe I'm overthinking it, but you're right. They've shown over the last 2 years, obviously, back-to-back premiers. But I think fatigue could be a factor as well. Look, with number 3, and I don't know where you had them here, Jacob, and I might cop a lot of shit for this, but I'm taking the Broncos here. My home team. Look, they've signed Brodie Croft. I know it's still, young. He's only played 2 games, but he's there for 3 years. He's young. Milford's young. He's in his mid-20s. Asako's in his early 20s. So you've got a young kind of spine there. And what gets me over the edge here is just the brutal, absolutely talent of that young forward pack. I mean, you've got so many young, awesome forwards in there. You've got Flegler, he's 21. Haas, 21. David Fifita, 20. Offengawi, 24. And I know that, there is chances that they're going to want too much money. They're going to want to go somewhere else. But from every whisper you hear out of that Broncos side, these young forwards, they want to stay together. They think there's something special and that they can create something special there. And I tend to agree with them. Once again, shortened season, start of the season 2-0. And hopefully Boyd will retire at least next season, if not this season. So things are looking up.
They definitely do have a bright future. Just stars under 28 that you didn't even mention, and I don't think you mentioned Katoni Staggs, for the outside backs as well.
Monster.
And I mean, Matt Lodge is still quite relatively young, Tavita Pangai Jr. as well.
Yep.
So that forward pack is insane, of course, no doubt about it. I had them 5th. Now, look, for me, it's like question marks. Like, yeah, they've got Croft, but how good is Croft? We're going to find out. What is Milf's ceiling? Can he get any better? Because he's had a few years in the league, and I haven't seen him take that next step. On that note, like, how good is Seabold? We're going to see the ceiling of him too, because we have never seen him get to the highest level. But their advantages also include playing at Suncorp Stadium, the third-party deals they get because they are the Broncos, a one-town team. They recruit well. Generally, they retain the stars that they want to keep. And for Fifita being case in point, that the talk is he will take a lower deal than what he might be offered at, for example, the Titans to stay in Brisbane. So that's always an advantage to a team like the Broncos.
Yeah, you're right. It is one of those teams that people want to play for. And likewise with your previous pick with the Roosters. Jacob, who have you got at 4?
So, mate, at 4, I've got the team that I had second on my board, and it's the Storm. And again, It's pretty safe pick. And again, you've got great scouting talent. And I know that, like, in the last 5 years, a lot of their success is on the back of Smith, Cronk, Slater. And you go back in the last decade, they had GI. And you can give them credit for scouting those players, but that is also a bit of luck. You're getting literally generational talent. So they're not going to be able to replicate that, but it's still the system. They still do recruit and find youngsters, scout youngsters well. Obviously, Craig Bellamy, a genius that I'd put on the level of Robinson. You've seen what they did the last 5 years, and I still think, let me go through their star youngsters. I mean, Puppy, I think he's got real potential. I was wrestling between Storm and Eels for me. I had them dead even on who I wanted to take, and I thought within a year or two, Pappenhausen might be better than Gutherson. Like, for example, I love Munster. They've got Addo Carl, though there's talk he may leave to Sydney. Big Nelson, Kalfusi, Dale Finucane, Brandon Smith, and even up and coming, they've still got Cam Smith, who could still help them win the comp this year. But even beyond that, I mean, they've got Harry Grant to slot in there, Kamikamitha, young star. So I still like that team that I know I'm going to get a lot of consistency and high performance out of. So I took the Storm at 4.
Yeah, look, and I can't argue with you. I had the Storm at number 3. Obviously you've got, history of success there, which is always a good thing. But the best coach arguably, maybe not even arguably in the comp in Craig Bellamy. But look, past performance is not always an indication of future performance. But in the Storm's case, they have had a long history of it. But you're right in saying that, this is not the same Storm team of old. And look, maybe, it's coming to that point where sometimes I think of it like the Spurs and Popovic and all the success that he had with those awesome players. And, the last couple of years they've been a little bit down. And you sort of say, well, how good of a coach really was he? And I guess we'll see that with the Storm in the coming years for sure. Because, I mean,
bit of an NBA reference there. You got the San Antonio Spurs. They had a big 3. The Storm had a big 3. And then the other one is people talk about the New England Patriots. They're a bit like that in an American football analogy. But you're right. Dynasties do come to an end, but I think that there's a bit of a myth that the Storm are an old team. Really, just Cam Smith is old. There's still a lot of young talent on this side that I pointed out.
Yeah, definitely. And I can't fault you at number 4 there. Look, at number 5, I'm going to take the Panthers. Look, I'm pretty high on the Panthers. I was at the start of this year. I like Nathan Cleary, and I think that, Maloney moving on, I think that because we're talking about 5 years here, if Maloney was still in there, maybe I'd have a bit more hesitation because, you kind of know that he's going to retire at some point or move on, and you'd wonder who was going to take his place. But you've got Jerome Luai in there. He's looked decent. He's had, experience there in the past. And those are 2 young halves, 22 and 23 years old. You've got a relatively young forward pack, very talented forward pack, one of the best forward packs in the comp, in my opinion. Kikau is an absolute monster. He's 25. He's going to be there, hopefully, until he's 30. Your outside backs, I guess, are a little bit of a worry. You got Mansour, aging. He's not going to be there in 5 years. I can almost guarantee it. But, I mean, you've picked up guys like Brent Naden, who's just come out of nowhere as an absolute monster at centre. And Brian To'o at wing, he just puts in every single time. He's 21 years old. He's probably going to be there for a while longer as well. So I think this team has a solid foundation, and I think they have room to grow. And being relatively young, I think they're going to be successful for the next 5 years, possibly even more.
Yeah, you took them 5th. I had them 6th, and I had them as a clear top 6. And I wouldn't be surprised if in the next 5 years, they're one of the best 4 performers for sure. I feel like there's a good ceiling there. I mean, the Panthers always have a good amount of juniors coming through. So there's a lot of talent. Just looking at other guys you might not have even shouted out. Stephen Crichton, this up-and-coming fullback, is a star. I mean, Coruscant is still quite young, who they recruited at hooker. Fisher Harris is young. Liam Martin in the forward. So I really like that young forward pack depth. So I think that the Panthers have definitely got a bright future as well. I like that pick.
Yep,
and I'll tell you you know what though, if it was my pick, I had this team higher. I had the Raiders at 4. Okay. So let me make the case.
Yep.
I feel like this team, I actually give them a little bump on their recruitment and their retention because of this English flavour to the team. And, you know, you got George Williams in. There's now a number of British internationals in this team. And I feel like they might want to stick together. And if there's any star English players emerging, that's almost the most likely club they would want to come across to because it'd be a bit easier to transition. And it might also keep them together. I rate Stewart as, you know, definitely an above average coach in the comp. I know that they're a contender right now. And I still think that the side is relatively young. I mean, Nickel Clockstad was a rookie last year, essentially. First, you know, season at fullback. Nick Kotrick is young. Jack Whiten is a star of the league.
Yep.
George Williams, we'll see how good he is. Papali is still quite young, as is Bateman. So I think I've got a rock-solid team that I also can see competing for the next few seasons.
Yeah, and I can't argue with the pick. I had the Raiders at 6. And likewise with you, I had a pretty clear top 6. You know, like Ricky Stewart, solid coach. I guess the only aging guy is really Hodgson, who's, you know, probably...
And even he's 30, and I feel like hooker is
yes.
a crafty position, where we've seen Cam Smith's 36, still going around. So I still think Hodgson will have a few good years in him.
I agree with you. It's probably the best position to be an older player. It's not like he's fullback or something like that. So can't argue with the pick there, Jacob. And then next up, this is a bit of a toss-up, but I'm going to take the Sea Eagles. I was humming and hawing over the Sea Eagles and the Knights. And I ended up going with the Sea Eagles, and I guess my main reason here was just the long-term signing of the Trebojevic brothers. You've locked them down for this entire 5-year draft. I know you've paid a fair bit of money for them, you know, 2.1 million combined per year. And that's, you know, that adds up, especially when you kind of take into account that Cherry Evans is on $1 million as well. So that's basically a third of your cap gone with 3 players. But those are your 3 key players, and you need stars like that to build around. You know, I know you've tied up a lot of money in those 3 guys, but I think that's huge. I think Tom Trbojevic is a top 3 fullback for sure. Cherry Evans, you know, as we know, he's a rep level player and loves playing for Manly, and he's going to be there for a long, long time. He's on that 10-year deal. So, you know, the only question marks with the Manly team are your outside backs are still a little bit weak. Maybe you can pick someone up along the way there. And my one worry as well is that Dylan Walker still just isn't a natural half. He's not a natural 5'8". And, you know, I understand that he's going to improve and that sort of thing. But, yeah, it was a toss-up for me between the Sea Eagles and Knights. But ultimately, the talent in the Sea Eagles side tipped me over the edge.
Well, I was disappointed to not get the first pick, but you have not taken the team I wanted at any of these spots. And I had a logjam. I agree with the top 6, and then I had a logjam here. So I also had to debate between Sea Eagles and Knights and a couple of others. And I'll tease ahead that I am going to take the Knights with the 8th pick. But about the Sea Eagles, I think I draw a lot of parallels between the Sea Eagles and the Knights. I mean, look, they both got superstar young fullbacks. Kalen Ponga is 22. Turbo is 23. They both got great halfbacks. DCE 31, Pierce 30. They both got foundational forwards. Jake Trbojevic 26. Clemmer is also 26, and they've signed Frizzell for next year, who's 28. Yes, now, I guess the big question mark with the Knights is they do not have Kalen Ponga's long-term future sewn up. So that's definitely some uncertainty. But I like the Knights because I feel there's more forward depth there. I mean, we'll go through the Manly team. I mean, Adam Fanua-Blake is still young as well. They've got a Ben Trbojevic on the way, like a third brother coming through, so who knows how good he is. But now Sully might be leaving. They don't have that many good young players. I mean, as I said before, DC is 31, so it's a lot of pressure on the Trbojevic brothers. Look at the Knights. So we've got, obviously, Ponga. Bradman Best is going to be good. Tex Hoy. The Saifidi brothers are young. Brayley, they signed at hooker. Fitzgibbon, Barrett, and I mentioned Clemmer Frizzell. So that's why I like the Knights more, and I'm happy to get them at 8.
How long?
They've got a good.
How many more good years do you think Mitchell Pearce has in him? He's 30 now.
And I feel that he does play a physical brand of footy too. I'd say 3 good years. I think that's probably best case scenario. I guess at the end of the day, what swayed me towards the Sea Eagles was
like you mentioned, Kalen Ponga's off contract 2022, and he's going to want a lot of money. So it's going to be, a matter of whether they pay him, and it's also a matter of whether just any amount he's actually worth it. I know he's a once-in-a-generational player, but at the end of the day, if you're paying him $1.5 million a year, that adds up.
That is a fair point. And you know what? What I worked against Manly was DCE got the Queensland captaincy last year, and I feel like he's 31. What juice he has left in the tank, if you want to ask the same question, how many good seasons he got left, he's going to be pouring a little bit more into that Queensland team. Whereas, he could have potentially, if he kept on getting snubbed, he could have been one of those great club players that never quite had the rigours of rep footy, but that's not the case. I feel that actually works against Manly because of his rep duties.
Yeah, and that's a fair point. Next up, I am going to take the Cowboys here at number 9. We're not quite getting to the dregs here yet. I'm still pretty high on the Cowboys, not only for this season, but in the future. Obviously, the signing of Valentine Holmes is good, and not only that, you do have him for the entire 5 years of this draft. You've still got Michael Morgan, who you're higher on than I am, but he's 28. He's going to be 33 when this is all said and done. That's still not too old for someone playing in the halves. Not only that, you've got Scott Drinkwater, who's 22, very young. He's going to be able to learn and grow into his role there. I think that's a good position to be in terms of the Cowboys. The one problem for the Cowboys is this forward pack. Apart from Taumalolo, who's 26 and an absolute monster, we all know that. But the rest of the forward pack is aging. They're getting towards, the back end of the 20s, early 30s. Likewise with guys like, Jake Granville's in his 30s now, Josh Maguire's 30, Jordan McLean's in his late 20s, and Gavin Cooper's 34. He's not going to have much more in the tank to go. So that's why I couldn't have the Cowboys higher. But in terms of that, in saying that, you've still got Michael Morgan, who's awesome. You've still got Valentine Holmes, who's only going to get better. You've got a lot of talent there. So if you can find some forwards to go along with Taumalolo once these older guys move on, I think they're going to be fine.
Yeah, it shows how deep and how talented the NRL is that we're getting, and I had the Cowboys 10th, you've taken them 9th, and they've still got a lot of stars and a promising future. I would say question marks about Paul Green because this team has done nothing since making the 2017 grand final. Like, he can't keep on underperforming. Like, this team has to, this team was in that logjam, and you've got the team that I'm going to take at 10 is going to be the...
hasn't been the same.
No, he hasn't been the same since 2017 either. But, yeah, this is a team that won the comp 5 years ago that's trying to transition, to a new era. Even the Seagulls, who won the comp about 9 years ago, they've got, like, this new generation, the Trbojevic brothers and DC, obviously. And the team I'm going to take or tease ahead is going to be the Rabbitohs, and they're transitioning as well. They won the comp 6 years ago, and now they've got a new crop of stars. But if I look at the Cowboys, they do have two superstars there. Taumalolo, no doubt about it, and Valentine Holmes, if he gets back to 2018 form. I think, don't know if you mentioned Isan Masters, one other young forward, Cohen Hess, but he needs to get a bit better. But you're right.
Isan Masters is the only outside back that's fucking... Well, the only centre winger under 28. They're all old.
They're a bit skinny in the forwards outside of Taumalolo. You're dead right. But it's still, it's quite a talented team to build around.
Yeah, definitely.
And so I'll move on to my number 10 pick, which I'm going to take the Rabbitohs, who I actually had as the 8th brightest future.
Interesting. Okay.
So what have I said about them? So I mean, you've got Wayne Bennett, who is a good coach, and I believe he's signed on to coach this year and next. And then the succession plan's already in place where Demetrio will take straight over. And he's a guy who's been the assistant at the Broncos and, probably deserves a shot at a head coaching role. So I feel like that's a pretty stable coaching situation. Big question mark would be, do they retain Latrell? And what kind of player is he going to be in the next 5 years, and who's he playing for? But but there's a possibility that Latrell finds that kind of 2018, 2019 form and blossoms and stays with the Bunnies because they're a competitive team. They've got a few other Indigenous players that he's connecting with and kind of feels comfortable in that system. Definitely a contender. Let me just name some of their stars. So Latrell is still young, obviously. Campbell Graham, Cody Walker, Cook, I think he's still 28. You got Liam Knight, Totola, and obviously Cam Murray, and the signing of Jai Arrow for next year. Those two foundational forwards that are both still got their prime ahead of them. And just one other little factor, they've got this bloke, Joseph Suwali. Don't know if you heard of him, but I had heard the name, so I did a little research. Supposedly the most sought-after 16-year-old athlete in Australia. This guy, they say, is a mix between Greg Inglis and Sonny Bill Williams, and he can't sign until he turns 17, which is in August, which means he's 18 next year. So if you're talking the next 5 years, if you've got the next Inglis and he's 18 next year, he could contribute, and this guy could be the next fullback if Latrell Mitchell doesn't stay. So, obviously there could be players that are the next crop of superstars in 5 years' time that we haven't even heard of today. So you can't really factor it in, but that's something that could be in their favour.
Yeah, and that's fine. I had the Rabbitohs at 10 as well. I think 8 is probably a little bit too high for me. Like you said, there's question marks about whether Latrell's going to stay or whether he's not going to be there. And even if he is going to be there, what position he's going to play and if he's even going to be at his best. But, I have worries about that. Those main good players, you mentioned a few of them, and just getting on in age. I mean, Damien Cook's 28. He relies on his speed. You expect that when someone hits 30, they're going to get a little bit slower. Adam Reynolds, he's 29. He's, been injury prone his whole career. Dane Gaggai's 29. Cody Walker's getting on as well. And they lost Tom and Sam Burgess last year. So it's just not the same Rabbitohs. So I had them 10, but you've chosen them 10. So I guess, that's fine.
I mean, Adam Reynolds, still a couple years younger than DC, a year younger than Pearce, doesn't play rep footy, has been made the captain, so he should be looking after it himself. And it's also a position where it ages a little bit better than, like, let's say, an outside back that relies purely on athleticism. So at least he's got that going for him.
So at number 11, I think we start getting towards the dredgy end of the scale here. And I chose the Cronulla Sharks. I didn't love the pick. It was just better than the rest of them. I have worries about this Sharks team. They've still got talent there. Like Sean Johnson, he's oldish. He's 29 years old, but he's still got a few good years left in him if he can stay healthy. But he's just so injury prone. So that's the worry there. Not only that, but Chad Townsend's 29 as well. He's getting on, and he can't carry the team by himself if something happens to Sean Johnson or if he moves on. So there's a few question marks there. I think the Jesse Ramian signing helps the outside backs of the Sharks a lot. I mean, obviously, he's a good young signing. He's going to be there for a number of years now. The forward pack is still pretty good. And this is the reason I put them at number 11. I understand that their forward pack is getting older. All your main guys, your Andrew Fafitas, your Aaron Woods, your Wade Grahams, they're all late 20s, early 30s. So, you expect them to have 2 to 3, 4 max good years in them. So, who knows what's going to happen to the Sharks, 4 to 5 years down the line. But I expect them to still be contending for the 8 for at least the next 2, if not 3 years.
I feel like you're very conveniently making your case. Like I say a guy like Cody Walker, who I think's 27 or 28, or Damien Cook, and I talk about them still being young, and you're saying that they're getting on. But then you go and say that Sean Johnson's still got a few good years left in him, and guys like Wade Graham and Fafita. So,
I mean, at the same, I've got the Sharks at number 11. I don't
I've got
love
them at 13. I don't love the pick here. And I mean, look at it this way: you're talking about they've got still an okay team this year, and you named a bunch of the guys, but we didn't pick them to make the 8 this year. No. And I don't think they're going to get any better. Now, what's to like about the Sharks? Moylan is still 26, 27. If he can get his soft tissue injuries right, he's still a very talented player. Bronson Cherry, they want to make sure they keep him. Mulatalo, I think, potentially could be a rep winger. You send Ramey and Brayley. Nikora, probably the one standout young forward on that team, but it's pretty thin. I know it's harsh for me to put them 13th after they were 3rd over the previous 5 years, but it's just that, the key players are all over 28, and I don't even think they're that great now. So it's hard, but I got the Sharks a bit lower.
And they're a little injury prone. Well, who would you have had? You got number 12 pick, Jake. Who have you got at number 12?
You know what? I'm taking the New Zealand Warriors at 12, mate.
Okay, you're off your fucking head.
And what I like about this is when we get to the lower part of the ladder and we're taking teams trying to guess who's going to have the most successful next 5 years, there's a bit of a higher ceiling with the Warriors. If it ever clicked for them, they have a higher potential because they so often don't play to their potential. So if there was a culture change, a new coach, it wouldn't shock you if in 3 years from now it was a top 4 team. Because again, when I look at, the foundation, the infrastructure, they do generally have good juniors that come through. Their recruitment retention's okay. They do have that edge sometimes with the Islander, or particularly the Kiwi superstars. Like they were able to sign RTS away from the Roosters, for example. Let's talk about the stars they've got on this team. RTS, Marmelo, Fusatua, those guys are bona fide stars, all under 28. Harris Tavita could be. I mean, it's skinny in the forwards, Papali'i, Tavanga, Tohu Harris. But they do tend to unearth one or two talented players that are not always on our radar. So I think it's a pretty justified pick, taking the Warriors at 12. I had them 11th. Where did you have them on your list?
Look, I'm not going to argue too. I had them 14, so I didn't have them last by any means, and I had a few good things to say about him as well. I said, like yourself, I have in my notes, you've got some talent there. You've got RTS. You've got arguably the two best wingers in the comp from last year, even though one of them's not playing wing anymore. Blake Green's going to retire soon, however soon that is, and you're going to have Harris Tavita and Nicarima in there, which you can build on, And, the forward pack is pretty grim, but you do have some young up-and-coming forwards in the team. So there's some promise there, but at the same time, 14 was pretty much as high as I could put them. Next up, and this was an ugly pick, I had the Dragons. Look, I know it's a pretty grim team and a team that I haven't liked to bet on, at all. I don't think we've bet on them this year, Jacob. Only been 2 games, but I don't like Ben Hunt, and I know he's stuck there for a few more years on pretty big money. You've got Corey Norman, I think, still there for a couple more years. I hope that he goes away after those 2 years because I don't think you can make a finals, with those two as your halves. You still have some talent there. You've still got some good forwards. I know Cameron McInnes at hooker is injured for a period of time, but he's going to be back next year. He's a rep level hooker. You've got Paul Vaughan. I know he's 30 years old, but you've still got a couple good more years out of him.
I believe Paul Vaughan's younger than 30 as well.
He's 30.
But someone can fact check that.
Someone can fact check. You got Tyson Frizzell. He's 28. He's got a few more good years in him. He's one of the best.
Yeah, they're all going to be at the Knights. He's signed for the Knights.
Sorry, yes. You got Trent Merrin. He's 30. He's old. You got James Graham. He's 34. He's old. So maybe they can pick up a few points over the next sort of 2-3 years, but at the same time, I don't have huge aspiration for this Dragons team. I think maybe they can make, the top 8 next year or the year after that, but at the same time, 13's as high as I can put them. But I didn't want to go any lower because I'm down on the other teams that are under them.
You know what? I had the Dragons 16th.
Okay,
so
interesting.
I have them as the worst future of any club. So I'm happy for you to take them 13th. I'll do you a favour.
Which is funny because I always give shit to Ben Hunt and Corey Norman as the halves there, and you always say, they're not that bad.
Corey Norman nearly played in that Queensland team that nearly got the upset in the decider last year. But look, I'll give you a favour. Paul Vaughan is 28, so I would actually consider him a forward that's rep level that has a few good years in him. But it is thin. Here are their good young players: Dufty, Sailor, Lomax. I'm being kind, saying good.
And Dufty is
Tarek Sims, Josh Kerr, Paul Vaughan, right? And I don't mind Ben Hunt and Corey Norman, but they're both past 28. I think at this point in their career, they don't suddenly take another leap to the next level. They've kind of shown who they are. And I don't know if they're going to get much better. And this team is not making the 8 this year. I don't see how they get better and make the 8 next year. So, and then it only gets worse. And losing a guy like Frizzell, that's a brutal blow because that's pretty much your best forward. So that's why I didn't want any part of him.
Possibility of getting DeBellin back, right?
But even DeBellin, we've said that for 2 years. And he's 30 years old now. I mean, the prime of his career has been taken away, and we don't know the circumstances or, what he did wrong or right. But, obviously, but that's brutal for them to lose him as well, because you look at how good this pack was 2 or 3 years ago and how many rep players it had. But it's all going to be for nothing. I just don't see any success coming the Dragons' way anytime soon, unfortunately.
All right, so you had the Dragons last. Let's see who you've got at number 14, Jacob.
Okay, so at 14, I'm taking the Bulldogs.
Okay.
And I had them 13th on my list. So obviously it's to do with a lot of young players in key positions in your 1, 6, 7, and 9. I think, Dean Pay, is he a good coach or not? I would question if Dean Pay wasn't coaching the Bulldogs, would any other club hire him? I feel like he's only hired because he is a Bulldogs legend. In saying that, he's gotten a lot out of not much to work with the last, couple of years. But let's go through their young core, the Bulldogs. Wateni Zelezniak, Remus Smith, Meaney, Wakeham, Lockie Lewis, Marshall King, Elliott, Chris Smith, Dylan Napa still has a few years left, Dean Brett, Joe Stimson. You know what this team is really missing? a young, like really solid back rower like a Harawira Naira.
Yeah.
It's brutal that they've torn up his contract, so he could land on one of the other clubs, and that could improve their prospects. It's quite sad that a team that like the Bulldogs that struggled so long for like really quality players and gets put in a situation where they got to tear up a player of a really good young up and coming forwards. But in saying that, if these players in these key positions do continue to improve, because we have not seen the best of these guys yet, then there is a world. And we've seen it. We've seen glimpses where they played really well for 6 weeks at the end of last season or whatever, where it wouldn't be out of the realm of possibility this team could be a finals team. So justified to be taken 14th on my list.
I was happy for you to take them 14th. I had the Bulldogs dead last, and it wasn't because I just hate the Bulldogs in general, but I've seen enough of this team over the last few years to know that this is the team that they are. And look, I know that you said they've got that young core. I know they've got young halves in Lockie Lewis, Brandon Wakeham, but I've seen enough of Lockie Lewis now to think that he's not going to be a superstar. I think I've seen enough. There hasn't been enough improvement for mine. And because they're young, they're going to be there for a number of more years. So that worries me. And the fact that, your halves that are young and the future of your team haven't showed me anything that makes me confident that they're going to succeed in the next few years. So I had the Bulldogs dead last. And at 15th, it was grim. Getting towards the end, it was the Tigers or the Titans. And I had reasons to take both teams. I took the Tigers in the end. Look, there's not much to like about this Tigers team at all. I think the one thing that sort of kept me, I guess, on the Tigers was Luke Brooks. And he's a talented guy. He's mid-20s, should be there for a little while. And he will improve. Obviously injured at the moment. But I think we're talking 5 years here. And once you get down to the bottom two teams, you need quality players. And at the end of the day, I tossed up between Luke Brooks and Ash Taylor. Who's better? And I said Luke Brooks is going to, deliver more over the next 5 years to this Tigers team than I think Ash Taylor will to the Titans. The forward pack of this Tigers team still sucks, and at the same time, they've just got a history of missing the finals now. So it's tough. It's tough to recruit good players to the Tigers, but at the same time, when it's Tigers Titans, I kind of think the Tigers will have an easier time recruiting players in the next few years than the Titans will. Maybe the Titans, if they exceed expectations by a lot down the line, players will want to go and play at the Gold Coast. But for now, in the next 5 years, I think the Tigers have the slight edge.
Yeah, I'm not going to debate with you Tigers over Titans. I had the Tigers 14th, so I also had them higher than the Titans. But for the record, I would have taken the Tigers before the Dragons, who you took. Where did you take them? 13th. So,
yeah.
And I mean, people should understand, like the Tigers came 9th last year, but we did talk in our season preview about how that was probably overachieving, and that was playing probably, winning a few close games and a few ugly games, and probably playing better than what the level of that squad really you would expect out of.
And only two games that we've probably proven relatively correct this season.
That's right. And I'll name like their core, I suppose, but you tell me which one of these guys will ever make an Origin team. Dwayne, Tommy Talau, Nofaluma, Moses Mbai. I know he has played for Queensland, but they were scraping to find outside backs.
True.
Luke Brooks, Billy Walters, maybe. I like Billy Walters, but he's still a very young player. Alex Twal, Aloye, Luciane Leilua, Garner, Cam. So there's a core there. I don't hate the Tigers team, and Maguire's a solid coach, but I just if you're ever going to really be a contender, you have to have superstar players, and I just don't see it. And we've seen we haven't seen them be able to recruit the superstar. They were trying to get Latrell, they didn't. They lost Madison, so you kind of boil this in as well that they haven't shown a good ability to either retain or attract stars. That's why I feel like there's always going to be a low ceiling on this team.
Yeah, which you're absolutely right. It's I wouldn't say underrated, but it's a huge factor when you're talking about 5 years. The ability to recruit good players this year, next year, and the year after is huge.
I mean, look at the Roosters that just won back-to-back comps. They don't win those comps if they don't recruit James Tedesco and Cooper Cronk.
Yep.
So at the end of the day, that is definitely an important part of the game.
100%. And
I'll tell
you have to take the Titans.
I'll end the suspense. So look. Yeah, I have to take the Titans, but as I said, I actually had them 15th, so I actually even think they've potentially got a brighter future than the Dragons.
Last.
Right? And here's the players they've got to build around. AJ Brimson, I think, really does have a bright future. Kelly, Sammy, I like. Peachy, I don't like, but still a young rep player. Ash Taylor, I think
That's the big
it's
if,
like,
really.
I don't know.
That's the big if.
I'm not super optimistic that he will get it together and play to the level of talent that he has, but it's still possible. Cartwright, I've almost given up on him as well, but he's still young for what it's
He's going
worth.
to be
Nathan
there for a
Peets,
while.
Jared Wallace, even Ryan James, coming off an ACL, is still only 27 years old. And a couple of the young forwards, Keegan Hipgrave, Fodawaker. And the thing is, as well, there's an unknown, as we don't know. Maybe Justin Holbrook is a miracle worker. Like, we have not really seen. He's only been there for 2 games. So he's going to need to be to really make this team a finals contender. But at least there's still uncertainty. Whereas you compare that to the Dragons, I guess the uncertainty is going to be, is the next coach going to be an improvement? Because I think Mary's days are numbers. But that's my list. So I don't know, did you want to kind of do a summary, or can you put up who each of us took?
I can put a summary up of who each of us took, but before I do that, I'll talk about the Titans, and I will say I had them at number 15. And let me tell you this, if we did a 10-year draft, I think I would have had the Titans higher. Just for the fact that, you mentioned all the players that have some upside in that team. Obviously, Cartwright and Peachy are the dumbest idiots of all time. But at the same time, I think just over the next 5 years, this Titans team probably won't be good enough for key players and gun players to say, look, I want to go play at that Titans team. But over a 10-year period, I think if the Titans can show something, they can make the finals, 1 or 2 years in a row. I really do think that the Gold Coast is a location that good players would probably want to move to and want to play at if this Titans team wasn't an absolute disgrace. So if it was a 10-year draft, I think I would have had the Titans a little bit higher.
It's funny you say that. Yeah, the Gold Coast would be a nice place to live, but if that club doesn't go broke like every other major sports team and the Gold Coast does, they might not exist in 6 years' time. True. So, but they hope they do. But you're absolutely right. I kind of wrote the same thing that, the Roosters, they've got a winning culture. It makes players want to go there because you're going to play on a contender. You're going to be playing meaningful games. You're going to learn from great coach and great, foundations there. And they attract. Winning breeds winning, and it's the same. It's the opposite with these losing clubs and you've seen the example I already referred to, like a David Fafita. The Titans have the money to sign him, but he's probably going to turn down their offer, which will be bigger than Brisbane's, because he doesn't want to go to that team where maybe he can't get the best out of himself. So until they do turn it around, that won't allow them to sign key players that you need to really be a contender. So I think you are right on that point there.
All right, and I'll just quickly run through the 2 teams that we have. If you guys want to leave us a comment, who do you think chose the best team? On the left, you can see me, Alex. I've got the Eels, the Broncos, Panthers, Seagulls, Cowboys, Sharks, Dragons, and Tigers. And on the right, Jacob's chosen the Roosters, Storm, Raiders, Knights, Rabbitohs, Warriors, Bulldogs, and Titans. So if you're listening to this live or if you're listening to this on podcast form, certainly feel free to let us know who you think chose not the best team now, but the best team the best team of 8 over the next 5 years. Jacob, how do you think your team looks?
Well, I'm happy because on my own mock, I had the Roosters and Storm 1-2.
And I'm happy because I had Eels and Broncos 1-2.
There you go, but I didn't win the coin toss. End up with my top 2 picks, I can't complain. But yeah, I can tweak this graphic and post it up with basically our combined list. Look, out of all the picks that you took, you really were only out a position 1 or 2 to what I had. So we're in pretty much agreement.
I think so too.
Of the prospects of the 16 NRL teams. But let us know what you think. Are we off the mark with a team that we're underrating, how good their future is, or a side that's probably best days are behind them? Let us know what you think. I think it's an interesting topic to ponder in these times.
Definitely.
As I said before, I think I alluded to, there has been a return date for the NRL.
Tentatively.
Floated out there, tentatively, and I'm not holding my breath, but since our last pod, we should say they're aiming for the 28th of May, right? So that's only 6 weeks away from now, and that would involve clubs getting back into training within a couple of weeks. So that is exciting. As I said, then this virus and, the conditions around society have to keep trending in the right direction for that to happen. But of course, in these times, it's great to be optimistic, and we're definitely looking forward to it. If it happens, we'll be ready.
Oh, absolutely. There'd be nothing better than to have some footy back on our screens. But in the meantime, guys, stay safe, stay inside, don't blow all your money on dumb shit, and we'll see you next time for another pod on something fun, I guess. Let us know what you thought about this one. See you guys next time.
Lego.